Number 8. Foot Cult. An obscure Japanese cult, Honohana Sampogyo, was started by a man named Teruyoshi Fukunaga, who believed he was not only the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, but also Buddha. Using this so-called persona to his own benefit, Fukunaga started a cult, but it was one that wasn't exactly run-of-the-mill. Instead of reading the palms of his believers, Fukunaga read the soles of people's feet, telling them things such as whether they had a serious illness or would suffer misfortune. Fukunaga would direct the unsuspecting person to attend an expensive training session where they were expected to purchase high-priced scrolls and other ornaments to protect them. Costing tens of thousands of dollars, the scrolls supposedly warded off evil, broke curses, and delivered the owners from sin. But fraud wasn't the only thing Fukunaga was eventually accused of. 4 members of the Honohana cult died during training, with one of the men reportedly falling from a second-floor window during a 5-day training session at the cult. Shockingly, that wasn't the only time the fire department had to attend the headquarters of the cult for such an incident. In fact, they were called there a dozen times to deal with similar tragedies. When Fukunaga was taken to court, he claimed he hadn't harmed anyone and only delivered the voice of God to his followers. The judge disagreed though, and charged the cult leader with fraud, wielding the power as the leader of the cult to con his followers out of around $1.5 billion. So, why were so many people duped? Apparently in Japan, generations believed their jobs and livelihoods were secure. When they suffered a financial downfall, they looked for spiritual guidance, and sadly, men such as Fukunaga preyed on their desperation. Number 7. Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. A fringe Catholic group known as the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, established in Uganda, became more well known after the discovery of mass graves in the year 2000. 153 bodies were found in a mass grave, with all victims, including 59 children, suffering from strangulation or suffocation. Discovered in Kalinga village, 30 miles from the sect's headquarters, where an additional 300 to 500 people died in a church fire the previous week. Sadly, the number of deaths is only an estimate, with the bodies burned beyond recognition. The group was established at the time when there was a rash of reported apparitions of the Virgin Mary and Jesus in Catholic churches in Africa. A number of seers, people who claimed they could see these apparitions, joined together with the so-called 12 apostles falling under the rule of the leader, Joseph Kibwetere, who claimed to have received religious visions since the 1980s. Over time, their numbers grew to over 5,000, with the members taking a vow of silence and developing a special sign language to communicate. They also predicted the end of the world would come in 1999, but when it didn't come to pass, some of the members who asked for their contributions money to be returned were accused of being traitors, killed and buried in mass graves. Soon after, Kibwetere spread the word that on March 17th, the Virgin Mary would be coming. Apparently, it was his way of hiding the suicide plan, with only some knowing the plan, while others did not expect to die. After the tragic fire, authorities tried to identify the victims, but since Kibwetere and the other leaders didn't have any records, no one knows whether they died in the fire or escaped with some of the movement's money. With so many not only taken advantage of, but murdered by the sect's leaders, the death toll was second only to the mass suicide at the Jonestown cult in 1978. Number 6. The Creativity Movement. Formed in 1973, a religious organization known as the Creativity Movement operates out of the United States. It was founded by a man named Ben Klassen under the name Church of the Creator, with beliefs that revolved around the white race as being superior and sacred above all others. It's not difficult to see how the fascist group became so hated. They considered Jews and other ethnic groups as subhuman. They were also known for committing violent hate crimes, as well as plotting to bomb a black church in LA and assassinate Rodney King. The organization flailed as lawsuits for their vile exploits dogged them, resulting in the leader dying after swallowing 4 bottles of sleeping pills. Under various other leaders, including Matt Hale, who was later convicted of soliciting the murder of a federal judge. The group grew to 88 chapters by the early 2000s. But after multiple instances of infighting, and even informants giving the FBI inside information, the group collapsed, with only 2 chapters remaining the following year. The group has tried to rebuild in more recent years, but with so much inner turmoil, the group, thankfully, isn't as unified as it once was. Number 5. Aum Shinrikyo. When a sarin attack occurred in Tokyo in 1995, unsuspecting commuters probably didn't think they'd come face to face with a cult. Members of a doomsday cult had left 5 bags filled with liquid nerve agent on board, resulting in passengers suffering from stinging fumes, which later turned into choking, vomiting, blindness, and paralysis. At least 5,800 people were injured, and 13 people died after the attacks, which had been coordinated between the 3 train lines in 5 separate incidents. What's most terrifying about the attack is that it only took a matter of seconds for the nerve gas to begin poisoning people. The culprit was an obscure religious group known as Aum Shinrikyo. Believing the end of the world was coming, they concocted the coordinated attacks. Originating in the 1980s as a spiritual group who followed both Hindu and Buddhist beliefs, the group was led by Shogo Asahara, who declared he was both Christ and the first enlightened one since Buddha. With tens of thousands of followers worldwide, Asahara was making a lot of money, urging followers to reject materialism while also paying handsome sums of money for blood initiations and rituals involving the leader's hair and bathwater. Of course, things escalated from there, becoming increasingly violent and kidnapping, injuring, and killing opponents. The group soon adopted chemical and biological agents to use, including in the 1995 attack in Tokyo. They even tried to release more nerve agents again in other stations, but luckily, a number of the members not only faced trial, but were also sentenced to death for their atrocities done in the name of a bizarre religion. Number 4. Chantau. Founded in 1993, a cult by the name of Chantau, which began in Taiwan, moved to San Dimas, California, and turned into something out of this world. Started by Honming Chen, who lost both parents at an early age, the cult was a New Age group that began after the leader, Chen, believed to have experienced a revelation from God to pursue a religious life. But it wasn't as straightforward as it sounds. Chen's fascination with UFOs also had a hand in his religious beliefs. Chen believed that God would announce his arrival in the physical world by appearing on television on March 25, 1998, later descending into human form with the physical features of Chen at the cult headquarters. Apparently, he also believed God would be able to replicate himself as many times as he needed to be able to greet everyone there. The cult leader also said that if God didn't appear, he and his followers wouldn't commit suicide. While these outrageous beliefs may seem strange, it has been reported that some of the cult's members included doctors, engineers, and teachers. One can't help but wonder why educated people believed a man whose beliefs combined Buddhism, Taoism, ufology, and Taiwanese folk religions, and said he could talk to God through a ring on his finger. Even though God didn't appear, Chen continued his ruse, offering salvation to those with AIDS and cancer, telling them their diseases were spiritual instead of physical. But his tall tales and manipulation seemed to get the better of him, with membership dropping to just a few dozen. Chen was later exiled from the group after he butted heads with other high-ranking members. The group continued on without him though, adopting a more conventional Chinese Buddhist belief system. Number 3. The Family. The Family is one of the more chilling cults to ever make headlines, with a leader who tricked mothers into thinking they were giving their adopted children to good homes and keeping them for herself, to the harsh treatment of those children by good women known as aunties. The Family will send shivers down your spine. Started in Australia by a woman named Anne Hamilton Byrne, the Family had hundreds of followers who attended a lodge to worship at her feet. Believing the end of the world was coming, Hamilton Byrne convinced her believers that she was the female reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Under the guise of building a perfect race through a collection of children, Hamilton Byrne forced those children to bleach their hair blonde. She also kept them isolated on her property, homeschooling them and giving them LSD as part of an initiation ritual. The children under her care believed they were brothers and sisters and thought Anne and her husband were their parents, until the police descended on the cult to break it up. Living apart from the adult cult members in an isolated compound, the children were put under the care of sadistic aunties who starved them, beat them, and punished them with cold showers, keeping the children frightened for their lives. Like other cults, adult members included seemingly well-educated architects, nurses, and solicitors, which makes one wonder how they were so brainwashed by Hamilton Byrne's bizarre cult. It took a raid in 1987 by police to bring the existence of the family to the world's attention. As news spread about the yoga teacher turned cult leader and her collection of children, the horrific treatment suffered by the children came to light. Prosecutors built the case against the aunties, but because there was no physical evidence or hospital reports of abuse, the women were charged with falsifying government benefits, money they had given to Anne as their leader. But Anne fled, and her followers refused to tell authorities where she was hiding. As it turns out, she fled to Upper New York State after being on the run for 4 years. By the time Anne was caught, she was a frail 71-year-old, later extradited back to Australia, where she and her husband ended up only paying a $5,000 fine each. In the end, her husband died, and Anne ended up in a nursing home with an estate estimated to be worth at least $10 million. Do you know anyone who joined a cult? What happened? Tell us your story in the comment section below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic for more intense and bizarre videos just like this one. Number 2. The Matamoros Cult. When a group of American drug enforcement officers working with the Mexican Federal Police stopped a car for speeding through a checkpoint near Matamoros, they didn't expect to find a connection to a cult. The year was 1989. After chasing down the runaway car, police found hundreds of pounds of marijuana. After searching the property where the car had stopped, they also found a chilling display in a small shed, candles, an altar, a large cauldron, and other items associated with brujeria, a type of witchcraft practiced in Latin America. After arresting the driver, Hernandez and his brothers, they were taken to the police station. It was then that one of the men recognized a missing person flyer for an American student who happened to disappear without a trace after getting separated from his friends in Matamoros. At the time of his disappearance, Mark Kilroy had been returning home from a spring break trip across the border from Brownsville, Texas. His friends had gone across the International Bridge, while Mark stayed behind to use the bathroom, never to return. After looking for their friend to no avail, the boys contacted local authorities, who denied Kilroy had even disappeared in Mexico. As for the cult, police eventually learned from the Hernandez brothers that Kilroy had been kidnapped by them and taken to the ranch they'd been arrested at. When the police asked why, the men said El Padrino, or the Godfather, wanted a human to sacrifice. Upon further investigation, police determined El Padrino was a local named Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, who had been raised in the Paulo Mayombe tradition, an Afro-Caribbean religion that had ties to Santeria. They often took part in rituals where animal sacrifice and human bones were used. Constanzo eventually ended up at the ranch, where he convinced the Hernandez brothers to participate in his rituals, including human sacrifice. When police raided the compound, they found Kilroy's remains. There were also a number of other bodies buried there, all mutilated in the name of sacrifice for one man's twisted obsession with dark magic. Constanzo fled, but police decided to burn his precious hut and all its sacrificial tools. When Constanzo saw it go up in flames, he went berserk at the apartment he'd been staying at, which alerted police to his whereabouts. After a shootout, the delusional cult leader was dead. Many members of his cult were charged with various crimes, and the Kilroy family finally had some sense of closure. Number 1. The Anthill Kids. Convinced a war between good and evil was coming, a man named Rog Thiero decided to start his own religious group, Basing his beliefs off of teachings of the Seventh-day Adventists, he convinced a group of people to quit their jobs and join his cult, the Anthill Kids. Forming a commune, Rosh, who told his group he was Moses, forbade his followers from contacting their families and began drinking heavily. Even though the rules didn't seem to apply to him, Rosh made sure his followers were watched, going so far as forcing them not to speak to one another unless he was present. He took to spying on his followers, and those who weren't devoted enough in his eyes were punished by being whipped with belts or hammers, suspended from the ceiling, and having all the hairs on their bodies plucked. As the cult continued to meet, Rosh became more and more delusional, believing the world was going to end in 1979. He drove his followers into the Canadian wilderness, convinced God would avoid harming them there. Remaining in the Canadian woods, Thoreau had 26 children with various women in his cult. He was so delusional that he even abused his own children. One of his unlucky followers, who was subject to horrific physical abuse, finally had enough. After multiple instances of Thoreau attacking and brutalizing her, she escaped and contacted authorities. When he was in prison, his cellmate, after finding out what Thoreau did to his followers, lost his temper, took a knife, and killed him, marking a fitting end to a disturbing man's life. Thanks for watching. Which of these terrifying cults terrified you the most? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like these. See you next time. Bye!